Little by little, the questions are getting a little louder. It seems like with each passing day, you're seeing more and more people starting to ask questions about the lockdown measures and the curfews and how effective they really are at curbing what they're saying that they're meant to be curbing. The lockdowns along with the curfew are some really easy strategies to let a population think that you're doing something. So it makes you look like you're doing a lot because you're doing something that has a very visible impact. This is a state of emergency. This is a lockdown. People must stay in their homes. You cannot leave your home at this time and at this hour. And okay, it makes it seem like a lot is being done. This thing is being taken very seriously. We aren't holding back any measures. This is about as significant a measure as we can take. Yes, it may be, but is the measure actually effective? We're not looking to see the most dramatic measure that can be taken. We're not trying to make it look like plenty work is being done. That's a kind of public service mentality. Not to offend the public servants, but the public service does have that more eye service working mentality. You go and you look at WASA or water services and you look at them when they are on a work site and you see one person working and 5 giving him moral support, and if a supervisor passes by, then they all pick up a tool and start to move around and make it look like they're doing something. That's a specialty of the public service. But we do not need this when it comes to running the country. We do not want a lockdown to make it look like we're working against the pandemic. We want a lockdown only if it's effective. In fact, I do not even want to utter the words that we want a lockdown. We do not want a lockdown. We do not want a state of emergency. We do not want a curfew. Now, many of us are of the understanding that some of this may, at least in the moment, seem like it is necessary. But I asked this a few videos ago. I can't recall exactly which video it was. I said it has come time, I think it has come time that we reevaluate and we take a look at the data to make sure that these measures that we are taking are effective. We don't want to just be doing measures, and the curfews now are redoubled because the coming Labor Day weekend, we have curfews in the daytime. You must be locked in your home. Now, this is a very serious encroachment on our freedoms. On a Labor Day weekend, the government of our country is telling us you are locked inside your home. You have lost your freedom of movement, and this isn't the first time it's continuing. And how long is this going to carry on for? Because the curfews do not have a zero cost. So even if they may be effective at slowing down the pandemic, there's a cost to it. So now you have to balance that cost, the cost that the curfews cost, and balance that with the benefit, if there's any, of the reduction that we'd see because of the curfew in the pandemic numbers or in the infection rate numbers. The answers to exactly how effective these curfews have been and whether the lockdown is indeed having a positive effect on our infection rates, those answers aren't readily coming from the government and those in authority, but there's an opinion piece here in the Express entitled Assessing Curfew Efficacy. So while yes, it's an opinion and obviously it could be debated, and I don't think the writer really had the intention of trying to settle the matter with a conclusive answer, it does bring up some interesting questions and add some other angles. The extended curfew hours recently announced for June 19th and 20th is our government's way of doubling down on the current state of emergency, which has been in effect since May 15th. This week marks the unenviable 1-month duration of the SOE and the initial 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, which was followed by a 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. curfew on weekends during June and a 19-hour curfew from 10 a.m. to 5 a.m. on public holidays. At least in theory, the logic behind curfews as a public health measure to reduce the spread of coronavirus is clear. Restrict the movement of the virus by restricting the people who can potentially spread it. However, does this have any scientific basis? More importantly, have the curfews implemented in Trinidad and Tobago yielded the desired result of lower COVID-19 numbers? The writer goes on, the effectiveness of curfews in reducing the spread of the virus is debatable. On the one hand, a study conducted in Jordan unequivocally attributed the success of the country's decreasing infection rates to its lockdown measures. That study was Katabe in 2020. On the other hand, a study conducted by Sun et al. In 2021 shows that while lockdown measures implemented in Hunan decreased community spread, it also increased transmission risk in families and households. By confining families to their households, we do precisely what the virus wants us to do: restrict human movement, which then gives the virus a greater chance of being spread. And this brings up one of the first questions I had when I heard about the lockdown measures. If you were following my YouTube channel from the very beginning, you would have seen one video where I spoke about the lockdowns and when we closed the beaches in Trinidad. And the evidence out there, the science out there already proves that the virus is specialized at spreading indoors. So closing places where you could have wide open gathering and open windy conditions doesn't actually help against COVID. And now you're restricting people into their households. And you could think about home and think about it on the side of privilege. I don't know who is viewing this and what your current situation at home may be, but you may have some privilege. So you may be thinking about home, and when you picture your home and house, the idea you get is that atomized setting where you have your own room and you have some measure of your own amenities in your own room, and you could go along for quite some time and never really interact with your family. Some people, when they're living in much smaller conditions, that may be how they're surviving. The only reason that 12 people could actually live in this 20 by 20 square apartment room is because they aren't usually home at the same time. But now you're forcing them to be home. You could be even shocked. Wait, I didn't even know my sister still lives here with us. And that's on one side. That may just be a bit funny. But there's nothing funny about the increased level of abuse that is occurring in these homes now. And when you're locking people in their homes together, everyone in everyone's household aren't good people. Some people are locked in these homes now with true monsters. And we're seeing the evidence. When you look at the statistics all around the world, we're seeing that domestic abuse and the occurrence of violence and abuse in household conditions is on the rise. For a localized perspective of the impact of curfews on infection rates, a study coming out of France examined virus transmissions in the wake of an 8 p.m. curfew and subsequent 6 p.m. curfew during January. Results show that in the Toulouse urban area, the new 6 p.m. curfew time did not lead to a reduction in infection rates. The researchers concluded that the curfew had exactly the opposite effect in the Toulouse urban area because the more restrictive evening curfew results in larger groups of people in shops and supermarkets before they all hurried to get home. The opposing opinion surrounding the effectiveness of curfews begs the question, is it worth it? And again, this just revisits some of the things that I was worrying about and that I was speaking about. I'm thinking, if I have a grocery list, I have a list of items that I need to go to the supermarket to purchase in order to allow my household to continue running in the usual manner. And then I may have another list of items that I need to purchase in the hardware, and these are required in order to fix and repair certain things around my house to again allow my household to continue running in the usual manner. Now, by closing these hardwares, by limiting me and telling me I can only go to the hardware on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I can only go to them in between the time of this and this, and I must jump 3 times and walk through 3 hoops to get there. Does that actually change the list that I have of items I have to purchase in the hardware? Does the list get shorter? Am I now going to not get this list? If these things are essential items that I really must get, and the reason you're telling me that the supermarkets and the hardwares must remain open to some extent is because they sell essential items. So these essential items that people have to purchase, by limiting time, are you going to limit the amount of items that people must purchase? Or are you now going to just limit the amount of time that the same amount of people must purchase the same amount of goods? And all that is going to do is increase the crowding. That seems pretty obvious to me. But again, there must be some kind of data and information out there that the authorities and those making the decisions may be privy to that we just do not have. For TNT, the early COVID numbers during the weeks that followed the initial curfew are far from ideal. If we set aside the first 2 weeks of the SOE as a buffer period for the curfew to yield the desired results, then consider this. From the period June 1st to 15th, the country witnessed a 6.5% decrease in confirmed cases. This in itself is good news. Any reduction in infection rates is a good sign. However, during the same period, June 1st to 15th, there has been a more than 50% decrease in testing. When we consider that testing has decreased by more than 50%, then the paltry 6.5% decrease in reported cases is cause for concern. It can be inferred that the decrease in testing, not the curfew, could be the reason for this 6.5% decrease in reported cases. Therefore, we should be less celebratory of the curfew's effectiveness and more concerned that testing has slowed considerably. The writer of this piece, Jarrell DeMattis, is a PhD student, and he concluded with a question. With so much at stake, can we afford to double down on curfew mandates when the research surrounding their success is inconclusive? And maybe more pertinently, when other health measures such as testing are slowing down? And that is a fair point, because we are seeing that other public health measures are slowing down. One of the most ridiculous things that I saw today, you know what's going to happen as a result of these curfews? These curfews are here to stop the spread of the pandemic, to decrease the spread of COVID-19. The coronavirus is going to be decreased due to this curfew and the implementation. You know what else is going to be decreased and stopped? Vaccinations. Weekend vaccinations rescheduled. The Ministry of Health has cancelled all vaccination appointments scheduled for this weekend. And that's about the most ridiculous thing I've heard for the week. So if we're saying that the real solution, we've heard this constantly, the actual path out of the pandemic is through vaccination. We must get to herd immunity. We must reach somewhere around that 70% of people vaccinated in the country, and that's the way for our economy to reopen. And this is our path back to the road to recovery, and it leads straight through vaccination. But then, how does it make any sense for anything to come in the way of vaccination? Shouldn't it be that the only thing at the top of the priority list of anyone trying to see about getting us out of this pandemic is getting vaccinations to occur as quickly as possible? So you're telling us that we must stay home to stop the spread, but you're also telling us that we cannot get vaccinated, which would also stop the spread. That's very ridiculous. Who is the person that came up with this concept? I would love for my YouTube channel to get big enough for me to be able to ask this person, whoever this planner is. And I feel that this planner, I suspect this is the same planner who planned that great rollout of vaccines last week starting. This same planner, I'd like to have a discussion with them, sit them right here for me to ask them exactly what were you thinking when this was going on? What is the possible reason? What is the possible rationale that you take away freedoms from people, saying that the reason you're taking these freedoms away is to get out of this serious disease that has taken a hold of the country? But what you're going to do while you're taking away people's freedom is you're going to stop them from getting the thing that you have said is going to actually stop the disease from spreading. That doesn't make any kind of sense. And lacking sense when it comes to the decisions being made in and around this lockdown and curfew isn't anything new. I saw a freshly appointed brand new Minister of National Security. He said that the lockdowns and the curfews were to make sure that no one goes to the beach. The beaches that were already closed. So we're locked down to make sure that we can't go to the beach that has already been closed. So what was the point of closing the beach? One out of the two of those instructions and mandates were redundant. And when things do not make sense, what people tend to do then is to try to figure out the sense out of it. That's one of the reasons that I hate watching movies that don't make sense and TV shows that don't make sense. Because I'm there wasting 2 hours of my life, and the way all my mind works, I'm trying to figure this out, not understanding that the thing originally wasn't meant to make sense. And if it is that this curfew and the lockdown measures weren't meant to make sense in the beginning, then tell us this so we won't be frustrating ourselves trying trying to figure out what is the purpose behind this. I'm seeing that the labor unions, they figured out their own purpose behind it. And it's the usual purpose that the labor unions always figure out. They're sure that the purpose for these curfews come weekend is to stop the labor movements from doing what they must and to oppress the labor movement. Government clamps down on holiday weekend activities. Speaking to Guardian Media, President of the Joint Trade Union Movement, Joseph Remy, described the lockdown as a frontal attack on the trade union movement. He added that the labor leaders were expecting this move, noting that during a meeting on Monday, there was speculation that the government will be moving to muzzle labor leaders. Now, I'm appreciative of labor unions and all they've done, especially in the last century. What they've done for workers cannot be discounted, and you cannot minimize that impact. But recently it seems more and more that many trade unions are turning into just the things that they were fighting against. As these trade unions become organizations that have been in power and in positions of power for decades and have accumulated quite a large amount of wealth, we're seeing that some trade unions seem very oftentimes like they're struggling to remain relevant and to remain down with the working class people. But that's not to say that they're wrong. I don't know what the specific reason was for the curfews, because as I said, it doesn't make sense perfectly lining up with the pandemic. So maybe it really was to stop the labor unions and the labor movement from making a little extra noise on Labor Day. He added, "I am amazed at the extent of the lockdown. It is unnecessary at this time, and it will put more strain on the working class. It is frightening." Now with that, I am in full agreement with. This is going to put more strain on the working class. Some of these people have already been out of work or on and off of work for over a year now. And the latest lockdown measures have put them fully out of work, and then the curfew measures would have killed some side hustles, and the government have been honest about that they're aiming to kill some of these side hustles because they're saying that some of the side hustles may be increasing the spread of the disease. I'm curious even about that they're saying that they don't want these things and they don't want this. Is there data to prove that also? But yes, income has decreased considerably for many people in the working class, and that's especially scary now when we look ahead and we see that the Minister of Finance has planned in the future that subsidies must be stopped if budget is to be balanced. Finance Minister Colm Imbert said government must reduce the country's long-standing dependence on billion-dollar subsidies on such basic commodities as water, electricity and fuel if it is to close the gap between expenditure and revenue and balance the national budget. Now, he's right. We do need to balance that national budget. But when you're looking at these subsidies with water, with electricity and fuel, a lot of the impact, a lot of the direct positive impact of these subsidies are felt in the working class pockets. If all of these bills raise, along with the reduction of income that we've already seen due to the pandemic and the lockdown measures, now you're going to have a lesser income having to provide for increased expenditure, and that is going to create for some enormous amounts of frustration. But if, as the finance minister is saying, it's inevitable, then what more can be said about it? There's just some more difficulty ahead for the working class. And if we're already seeing that the future holds such difficulty for the working class, why do we seem like we're punishing them without a cause with these curfews? Why are we now putting people through this stress? Tell me in the comments, do you think that these curfews are actually warranted? Do you think that they are having the desired effect and that they are needed to keep the pandemic at bay and to keep it under control? Or do you think that these curfews and maybe some of the lockdown measures on a whole are just too draconian and too authoritarian and leading down a very dark and dangerous path for our country? Drop a comment and tell me what you think, and if you haven't liked the video yet, don't forget to like it also. Share it to those who may like this kind of content. Start a conversation with it. See if we could uplift each other and increase the level of discussion we're having in the country. And I'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m.
And you feel the music rising with the time.